Welcome to the Monetize Your Payments podcast, where we cover the entire payment facilitator ecosystem. If you are a SaaS company, ISV, or a marketplace interested in monetizing your payments, this podcast is for you. You will learn what it takes to monetize your payments, as well as find the vendors, suppliers, and organizations that will help you succeed. You are going to hear success stories, lessons learned, and advice from all sides and all angles across the payment facilitator ecosystem.
We like to think of ourselves as a B2B payments network. We call ourselves that because we asked ourselves a question: if payments was built today, what would it look like? It looked very different than what it was when it was born back in the 50s and 60s, you know? It looked more like a Netflix than a Blockbuster.
That was Kris Riley, Head of Business Development and Platforms at Paystand. I'm your host, Greg Myers, and this is episode 4 of the Monetize Your Payments podcast. Kris was born in Philadelphia and grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. He went to Marquette University in Wisconsin and now resides on the West Coast. Kris focuses on the indirect side of the business for Paystand. His team engages with partners like Netsuite, as well as software companies that operate in the B2B space. Paystand was founded in 2014 and is privately held, venture-backed, and recently had a Series B with DNX Ventures and Battery Ventures. Paystand considers themselves a B2B payments network with the focus of being a Venmo for B2B payments, making it seamless and intuitive. According to Kris, the 3 main advantages on bringing payments in-house are 1, the customer merchant experience, 2, the monetization aspect, and 3, the data that is created and how the customer can leverage this data for new and interesting products and services. This is a great conversation about monetizing payments in the B2B space. So let's jump right in. Hi, Kris. Welcome to the Monetize Your Payments podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't we start by having you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, went to school, maybe a few things like that.
Fantastic. Yeah. I born on the East Coast, actually born in Philly, was raised in the D.C. area, went to Marquette University, actually, in Wisconsin, and fell in love with, I would say, IT and the restaurant business. I paid my way through school, working in the tech department and serving drinks, not at the same time though. And then so that led me down to hospitality technology, which led me to payments, and finally made my way west. So slowly going from east to the Midwest to the West Coast, and where you have me today.
Okay, great. Well, today you are the Head of Business Development and Platforms at Paystand. So talk a little bit about your roles and responsibilities there.
Of course. So running the BD team, it's focused on 2 specific things. Well, I would say on one thing, really on the indirect sales side of Paystand. So we have a direct team that talks to CFOs, accounting leaders, and so on. My team works on the indirect side of it. So on the channel side, we're engaged with the folks at like NetSuite and other ERP partners that we have to drive new business to the direct sales team. On the OEM and platform side, our team engages with software companies that are selling to customers that we won't normally sell to, right? So our average customer is, let's call it 70 million in annual revenue and above. These are manufacturers, distributors, and so on. When it comes to interior designers and plumbers and whatnot, we're not selling to them. But what we will do is OEM our software to those software companies and enable them to sell payments to those types of customers. So on both sides, it's going to be an indirect type of engagement. Does that make sense?
Makes absolute sense. Yes, absolutely. So talk about Paystand as a company and give us an overview of what Paystand does.
So Paystand as a company, we were actually founded in 2014, privately held, venture-backed. Recently had our Series B with partners like DNX and Battery Ventures. And we like to think of ourselves as a B2B payments network. We call ourselves that because we asked ourselves a question: if payments was built today, what would it look like? It looked very different than what it was when it was born back in the 50s and 60s, you know? It looked more like a Netflix than a Blockbuster, right? And so classic payments is more Blockbuster, charging you per transaction, penalizing you for growth, as opposed to Netflix, where it's more of a SaaS-based engagement to just zero in on the experience. And then no matter how many payments you use, the different things you need to turn on, you can grow without that level of penalization, right? And so that's the way we think about payments specifically for, I would say, the B2B space. Because at the end of the day, There's a Venmo for me sending my nephew money in college, right? Makes it easy because instantaneously. There's a Stripe for e-commerce transactions for Etsy, software companies, and so on. But for the B2B space, there isn't a Venmo for B2B. So to kind of put it plainly, what does Paystand do? Well, obviously focusing on kind of rebooting the financial infrastructure, but really at our heart of hearts, it's being that Venmo for B2B to make their experiences and their engagements a lot more seamless, a lot more intuitive, and as quick and as fast as those consumer-led engagements.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Let's kind of start at the beginning and think about, we're going to talk a little bit more about how you guys help software companies in that B2B space. So talk about what integrating payments means to them and kind of your view of how you help them do that. Sort of just define that term for people in this specific space.
Integrate payments. Yeah. We get that a lot. And sometimes I look at the word integrate and incorporate payments differently, but at the basics, it's really about the experience, right? To integrate payments, I would say it's connecting the dots so that the experience for your user is held within the software, right? From start to finish, from the invoice to cash, right? It's the cash is connected and baked into the software. I think the best way that I've actually read that it's been put, Pete Flint, who runs NFX.com, and he's a VC, talks about it when looking at Craigslist versus Airbnb, right? Craigslist is a great marketplace. I'm sure you've used it before as well, where you can connect the dots with buying something online or getting a gig or finding a room to rent. But when it comes to the payment experience, it's in person. You're either giving them a check or cash or something separate from when you had to find the thing that you're looking to do. But when you look at Airbnb, to your question about what does it mean to integrate payments, the experience of finding that room, connecting the dots, and closing and solidifying that transaction is all within the experience, not just for the payer, but for that host as well, all baked in. So there's a bit more trust and a bit more intuitive when it comes to locking in that transaction. Craigslist, I think, is valued at $3 billion from Forbes. Airbnb, with this last, I would say, round with their private equity firm, is like 16 billion, right? And so to integrate payments is really to focus on an experience that not just supports your customers and your users, but I would say supports the success of the company as well.
Right. That's interesting, the Craigslist example, because I actually sold a boat on Craigslist and the person came to my house and I had a cashier's check and we went to the bank together to make sure everything was on the up and up. Not necessarily an easy payment experience, right?
Exactly. But then if you think about that type of experience, yes, it's probably simple for you to do that. You can sell the boat and you can make that happen. But look at the time that you spent, right? You had to go get the cashier check, then you had to go and connect with that person and then go to the bank. While it might have been minutes, maybe a little bit less than an hour, all in, if you multiply that by millions of transactions in a platform, it starts to add up, especially for users that might use your platform for their livelihood, right? If they're in it every day, working with their customers, those minutes, that half hour starts to really add up. And again, that goes back to a better experience, not just for the payers, right? Great, you connect, you save my credit card on file, but it's for the people that need to run their business.
Sure. So you've talked a lot about it being important for the experience. What other reasons would, since you guys focus more on sort of the B2B side, so what other reasons beyond the experience would a B2B company want to bring those payments in-house and integrate it into their software?
Yes, the experiences, I think, is the number one thing. But then, one, it differentiates their product from the others in the marketplace, right? Having that holistic approach. I would say, two, when you do pull payments in-house, there is a monetization aspect, right? Just like with anything that a software company owns, there are the vendors that a company uses, right? That keeps their lights on, they pay insurance, the vendor engagement, and they think about it a certain way. But when they think about their developers turning on new features for their product, it's a revenue generator for that team, and they think about it a different way. So when you think about bringing payments in-house, it actually goes on the P side of a P&L, and it actually drives revenue, I would say immediately, because when you get the monetized payments, when you get on the other side of the payment curtain, it adds an awesome new line of revenue, not just from a SaaS basis, but from a transactional basis. But I think it also gives them an ability to manage their product in a way that they've never been able to before. Because having a singular line of revenue, you have that SaaS engagement, you're trying to find new ways to either keep the customer or add new interesting hooks to transactionally add another 10, another 20, or some incremental amount above to drive that SaaS figure a little bit higher. When you bring payments in-house, that customer that might have been worth an LTV over 3 years of $20,000 is transacting $100,000 a month, and you're able to have, let's call it 50 basis points on top of that. That becomes a compelling and considerable amount of money that customer now is driving outside of that SaaS. And so when you're able to bring payments in-house, I think that the number 3 thing is monetizing, driving new revenue. But then it goes a step further, Greg, because once you have the payment transactions, you have the data. So when I think about with the conversations that we have with our customers around monetizing payments, it doesn't stop there, right? Because now that you have the data and you own the software, you own the information, you know how many invoices that customer is sending out. You might even know how many POs they need to pay. And now you have their transaction history. So the conversation that I love having with my customers is, how are they then using that data, one, to do interesting things around freemiums and other types of ways to grow their software and add new customers? 2, how are they working with bank partners to add new and interesting products on top of their software, like lines of credit or fractional type of engagements? Now, this is something that we don't do, but once we're able to bring payments in-house and give them that information, it makes for some awesome and interesting conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So to summarize that, customer experience, revenue, and then leveraging the data, you'd say those are sort of the top 3 reasons.
100%.
Okay, awesome. And then what do you guys do different, or what differentiates you guys from your competitors out there?
So I think I said it earlier, is we focus on the B2B engagement. You and I were talking about this earlier. $18 trillion is being moved on average on an annual basis between businesses, right? And it's a shame because it's a time thing. We talked about that. So focusing in on the B2B space leads us down different roads on what we build and how we build it for our customers. So I would say that kind of us staying in that lane differentiates us from our competitors in the space. Now, all good, the Stripes and the Phoenixes of the world that focus on an e-commerce transaction, it's great. But when you zero in on these B2B type of engagement, money moves differently, right? When you think about the supply chain and logistics software company, it's not a transaction when they lock in an order, because the goods is being shipped from somewhere that needs to then hit a freight forwarder, that then needs to get checked out by the delivery team, that gets signed off at the retailer. The transaction isn't necessarily done because there's all these other checks and balances along the way. What differentiates us is us being able to take payments out of its expected state and attach it to the workflows and expectations of the software company so that money moves with that experience. When you think about that purchase, let's call it, a $100,000 purchase. Classically today, I need to send a paper check to the supplier, and then that supplier is then cutting the percentage to the distributor. The distributor is cutting the percentage to the delivery team, right? And so the life cycle of that payment is almost 90, 100 some days from its start to finish. When you really think about it, you talk about the boat, right? It's 1-to-1. But when you think about B2B transactions, there's a lot of time in between the start and finish of that. But when we bring payments in-house and when we zero in on top of those types of experiences, we can do more of a hub and spoke model for the payment so that when that $100,000 transaction happens, the supplier gets their bit, but then because it's baked into the software and it's tightly connected to the workflow, we already know that the delivery team gets 10%. We already know that the distributor gets X percent as well, and the money moves accordingly, updating and managing the expectations, right? And then people are getting paid faster. When you actually dive in to all the different scenarios and those types of roles, one of the biggest things we hear is, it takes forever for me to get paid. And so we're doing that and working with these types of software companies, addressing these specific types of scenarios. This is what differentiates us, because we're able to turn that on, give them those insights, give them that trust so that their business can move as quickly and as intuitively as they need to. And it's not just for supply chain logistics. It applies to so many different industries like healthcare, like insurance, or even as simple as property management. When you have a major company, the property owner, the vendor vacuuming the carpets, and the tenants, and so on.
It sounds a lot more complicated.
It is.
Yeah. So what are some keys to success for a company? Say you're talking to a B2B company that wants to monetize their payments. What are some of the keys to success for them?
I would say the keys to success is it's almost like a re-education for these companies, right? So the first key to success is them letting go what they think payments are today. Because oftentimes, a lot of the software companies, one, don't incorporate it today. And two, when they have, they treat it as an e-commerce transaction. So the first key to success is a re-education. And we do that by allowing them to say, hey, if you had your druthers, if everything worked the way that you envisioned the experience for your customers would be, what would that experience look like? Let's move payments over here and let's talk about the experience. So the first key to success is dialing in the experience, dialing in the workflow, not just for payers, but the suppliers in the software, and then starting there. Then it's attaching payments and our APIs, and to get into technical details, but attaching the money movement against those workflows. So the other key to success is working with them on top of our APIs and then turning that workflow on and making sure the expectations, making sure the insights and the data get shared appropriately. Also, another key to success is enablement, right? When you have these software companies, it's not just, hey, we have great APIs, which we do. Hey, there's money on the other side of this hill, which there is, but it's enablement. Here's how you have the conversation. Here's how you can convert these customers. Here are the expectations that these AR managers, these controllers have when they need to close out the books and do that. It's the entire experience that we zero in on. And I would say that's one big key to success is our customer success team working with these customers to make sure not just that, great, there's money there, but are those features and functionalities that we normally turn on for enterprise? 2/3 of our business, Greg, focuses on those direct customers. 1/3 of the business, like I said earlier, takes what we built for enterprise and works with software companies and OEMs that platform in there, not just from a great usability, not just from a monetization standpoint, but now these AR managers, these people that are using this piece of software to manage their business and to close out the books and pay their salespeople. You know what I mean?
Right.
All of those features and functions that we share from an enterprise standpoint, they have at their fingertips to make their lives a lot better. So enablement is another key to success that I would say for those customers.
So is part of your solution, even when you go to these software companies in the B2B space, are you still setting up like the whole vendor management like you would a regular business-to-business company that's not a software company? So you still do all of that sort of core stuff, and then on top of it, you add the monetization aspect?
Absolutely. And so we allow them to do interesting things around our own. We have like a onboarding process or KYC, know your customer process that they leverage to help them turn on new vendors. We also allow them to connect to the vendor banks so that one, they can get paid, but two, we do interesting things with that data from their bank that allows these software companies to measure things like creditworthiness or what the vendor is, who type of vendor they are. By polling their bank account or doing interesting things around history of payments and so on. And so there's a lot there. Now, it's not a scorched earth approach, right? Use our entire system and go. But when we go back to the first conversation, walk us through the experience, we can then have a more, I would say, integrated approach to turn on the right webhooks, the right endpoints to solve their immediate and their future needs. We're not about turning things on overnight. It goes back to a lot, because it's an educational conversation. Hey, there's a better way to do payments. let us walk hand in hand as you bring payments in-house. It's not a flip of a switch. It is a partnership. It is a growth that we take on with each customer.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the negatives, the pain points. What do companies run into when integrating payments, and how do you guys help solve those problems?
Right. And so one of the first things, I would say that one of the first pain point that we run into, again, from a classic standpoint, is that they're just integrating payments, not incorporating them. And so the vendor is owning that entire process, right? And so the vendor that they use, a third-party partner they've integrated to, is doing the onboarding. They're controlling the fund flow. And classically, that vendor is treating it as an e-commerce transaction. And so the first pain point is, hey, how do I manage the experience of my users when they're already getting paid for this transaction? So the first pain point is, I need a better experience. The second pain point is where that vendor, and this is a classic one, right? We're all capitalists in a room. This vendor is taking 3% of every transaction. What do I need to do to get access to that or leverage that? Because then there's expectations around the charge, when the charge happens, and so on. I would say, and I'll get into the weeds for some of your listeners, there's other vendors out there that might do an ISV relationship, right? Where, hey, we'll not only bake in integrated payments, but we'll give you a piece of the puzzle as well. And kind of solving that 3% thing. But oftentimes that's maybe 5, 10, maybe even 15 basis points. But then it's paid out 30 days in arrears of the month. And they don't really know what's happening because a lot of these vendors talk about things like interchange plus or 50-50 split. The split of what? How does this happen? How does it work? And it's a lot of details that aren't dialed in for that customer because they're focused on their software. And so the pain point is when someone already knows how to monetize and they're working with a partner from ISV and they're saying, I'm getting paid 45, 60 days after the month or what have you. Like, how do I get a better handle on it? How do we manage this better? And we solve that. I know we're talking about the pain points today. We solve that by, again, bringing payments in-house, allowing them to manage themselves, and then going back to the Netflix approach, we keep our lights on through SaaS. And so our whole ethos is sharing or giving our partners access to those wholesale rates because we've done the compliance, we've connected to Visa, MasterCard, and so on, and allowing them to make their own decisions around what that margin is. And so when people often ask me, well, Kris, what's your splits? What's XYZ from you? Again, this is re-education, right? And they're like, I know monetization. I'm getting 70-30 today or what have you. What's your split? And oftentimes I define myself 100-0. I don't know how to say this better. Interchange plus 0. It's all yours. And so I would say that other pain point is when they've already know monetization, it's wrapping their arms a bit tighter around it and giving them unprecedented control around what that margin looks like when they get paid and when their users get paid. And they have their hands on the steering wheel when it comes to all of that, as opposed to leaning on a vendor that's managing it for them.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. I like this question because I think it gives you an opportunity to talk about how you work with customers. So if you don't mind, walk us through the journey. Say a company calls you and says, hey, we're interested in monetizing payments. What does the conversation look like and what does that journey look like that you take a potential prospect or customer through at Paystand?
Man, if a customer calls me tomorrow and says, I want to monetize payments, I'm looking around the sales room saying, okay, whose friend is this? What kind of trick is this? Because that doesn't happen that often when they're coming in asking for that. But when we do get a customer to that point in time, when they're ready to monetize, or like you said, a customer is coming in, I go in and make sure that it's not just a basis point conversation. If they're looking to have another basis points conversation, then I'll tell them, listen, you're probably a shrewd negotiator. Go talk to the partner you have today and shave a couple more off. We're not in the business of just trying to give you more access to basis points. We're in the business of reframing how you and your users look at payments, rebooting their entire conception around how payments move, and then leading that conversation around product and experience. So if you want to have that conversation, I'm happy to do that, because that's where the power of monetization of the payments and the data really come into play. And so that's the first step to that. And when we get them through that and they help us understand the experience of their users on both sides of their software, the AR team, the payers, and all the other stakeholders, then we dial in a go-to-market with them, right? Obviously, there's education on APIs and all of ours are RESTful and all that. But then we go in and go-to-market. How are you going to engage these customers around monetization? Do they already know? Is there a different way to do it? How are they looking at the payment methods? One of the key things that Paystand does is we've normalized the payment experience around card, ACH. We're actively turning on things like domestic wires, things like lockbox services and paper checks, so that experience, and I know I say that a lot, but that's really what it comes down to, right? That experience isn't disjointed and separate, right? Where often software teams are, well, I have a team for credit cards, but I have another team that does the CSV file for the bank. Oh, but then the wires I do over here, and I have this other thing. You have this awesome piece of software. Let's incorporate all the different things. So monetizing, looking at the experience of the users, but then looking at the different tools around fund movement and normalizing that approach and engaging on that go-to-market. What does that look like? What's the first cohort of customers? How are we having that conversation? Let's talk about an enablement. From that, we dial in what we call an ROI. Let's give you line of sight. Well, how do we do that? Well, because we have wholesale blended rates from our partners, they get the foresight they need to understand what margin looks like. Again, I talked about one of the big pain points is they don't know. So it's going to be hard for them to understand and forecast against revenue. But with Paystand, they can easily do that because we have very flat and simple rates. I think the total amount of our rate sheet is about 6 or 7 points, points of interest, and that's it, right? Because we want our customers to focus on what they do best, which is the software. Putting the cash in their invoice to cash software for the construction industry or what have you, right? And so we focus on that ROI so they can understand what the first 12, 18, 24 months looks like when they turn on Paystand. And then from there, we dial in a project plan against it with their team, mapping it out. It's almost like they can put it into their own Jira. Our team gets alignment with their technical team as well. And we focus on the launch and take them live against their plan that we help them build. And then once they're live, remember I talked about enablement, that ROI, that 18, 24 month, I would say, forecast that we built with them actually becomes the OKRs for our customer success team, keeping us honest with our customer, but also keeping them on task to make sure that we're not just helping them turn these on, but then they're driving that revenue and being able to do new things with the new payments as well as that data that comes from turning on Paystand.
What I find interesting about this, having been in the payment space for 15 years, and a lot of my work has been with small business, it's just very transactional, where this is very consultative. And I think you said it, I don't remember the exact words, but you're really changing the paradigm of how they think about payments. And I think to me, that's sort of fascinating because it's not the same story. It's not the same, like you said, selling basis points, that kind of thing. So
Exactly.
Sort of your approach to it, I think, is interesting. We've covered a lot of things already about monetizing payments, integrating payments, and Paystand. Before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts you have about either topic, the payment side or Paystand itself?
You know, I would say the thing is, and this is what excites me, right, is exactly what you brought up, which is looking at the experience of the merchants through the eyes of these software companies that we engage with. I would say it adds a bit of pride, right? Because I used to be that small business owner and having to kind of go to the bank and do the cashier check and so on. So being able to not just turn this on and have them drive revenue, but enabling these, I would say, these entrepreneurs and these other business owners the same type of success that they see on the consumer side is really rewarding. And so my final thoughts are, as you have more conversations or anyone listening, dial in the experience. Look at what the expectations are from their users and how it can be ideal when you remove your expectations of how payments were built today. And if you reframe it to think about what it would look like it was turned on today. Actually, Greg, I'll leave you with a quick little anecdote. Mike Head of Solutions shared this with us on a presentation call with a customer where he they didn't get it. They're like, I don't get why. What do you mean rebooting payments and it's different? And he walked them through and he says, remember years ago, there was a DevOps person or team that'll come in and they have the cables and the load balancers and they're in a room in the basement of the office installing rack space servers and plugging all these other things, right? And they're doing this entire industry. And now, when you think about it, there's just a highly caffeinated individual in the corner managing your AWS account. So as a company, you didn't have to spend cycles worrying, focusing, engaging with what was built and the servers and are they up and what's happening, because AWS has done a good job of saying, hey, you focus on the business. So the conversation we're trying to have today is, hey, software company, focus on the business. Here, payments is a bit more seamless, a bit more easier for you to do when you have someone that's taking care of the compliance, taking care of the PCI, wrap them up in all some needs to use APIs, allowing you to have a better conversation with your customers.
Well, thank you so much for that, Kris. That was a great way to wrap things up. I really appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you for everything you shared. What would be the best way for someone to get a hold of you?
Right. I would say just reach out to sales@paystand.com. Not just myself, but our entire sales team is excited to have these types of conversations with customers.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Kris. I appreciate you being on the show today.
Greg, thank you so much. Have an awesome afternoon.
You too.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Monetize Your Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at monetizeyourpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you will find our show notes. If you would like to be on the show or have a suggestion for a guest, please email greg@monetizeyourpayments.com.